way into the room. It was my mother's will reading, tied to a family trust that had been gathering dust for decades. Dad passed last winter. Passed, like he was a polite fart at Thanksgiving dinner. So this whole thing felt like a formality. Rubber stamped, as Trent would say. But I still showed up in slacks and a clean shirt, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would be the day I stopped feeling like a spare part in my own damn family. Mr. Milton Graves cleared his throat. Old Boston baritone, the kind that makes even adults sit up straighter. The mahogany walls smelled like furniture polish and ego. His fingers flipped through the file like he'd done it 100 times, and maybe he had, for families just like ours. He started with Trent's line. To our son Trent, for his unwavering dedication, Graves droned. Then came the list. The lake house on Squam Lake, the Santa Barbara condo, controlling shares in Carver Dynamics, a stock portfolio that probably needed its own accountant. Trent smiled without showing teeth, just a slow pull at the corners of his mouth like he was trying not to laugh. I felt my jaw tighten. I knew the script. Didn't mean it hurt any less hearing it out loud. And to our son Reed, Graves said, pausing just long enough to grind the knife in, we leave the painting titled Dusk Ledger, currently hanging in the study. The room went quiet. Not polite quiet, like someone had pulled the plug. Even the damn clock stopped ticking in my ears. Trent chuckled. Not a full laugh, just enough to echo off the wood paneling. A painting? He said, not even trying to hide it. I leaned forward, blinking like I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Graves nodded solemnly. It's the expressed wish of your mother. Trent came over and clamped a hand on my shoulder. Hard. Just enough pressure to make it sting. I'll find you something in the company, he said. Mailroom's safe. I shrugged his hand off and stood up. I was done pretending. That day, it hit me. This wasn't just favoritism. This was legacy, sealed and notarized. Heir and spare. And I was done playing spare. Later that afternoon, Inez Marquez met me at the front gates of the mansion. 22 years working for our family, and she hugged me tighter than my own mother had in the last decade. She used to sit in that study for hours, Reed, Inez said, her voice low, just staring at that painting. Always muttering about numbers. We walked to the study together, and I pulled Dusk Ledger off the wall. It was heavier than it looked. Thick wood frame, old canvas. Inez wrapped it in a quilt from the lake house, the one with the pine tree pattern and moth-bitten corners. Outside, the security guard at the gate raised an eyebrow. Are you authorized to remove company property? I didn't even slow the truck. It's my mother's painting, I said, and hit the gas before he could ask another question. Before we continue, tell us which city or country you're listening from. Let's see which corners of the world we've gathered from today. Thanks. And now the story. I drove straight back to my apartment in Nashua with that painting buckled into the passenger seat, like it was royalty. At the time, I thought the insult was the whole story, but I had no idea what I was hauling home. No clue that this worthless painting would start screaming louder than any inheritance ever could. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the middle of my apartment, heart punching my ribs, staring at the door like it might explode. Trent knocked again. 3 soft taps, same as before, then silence. I didn't move. Not because I was scared, but because I knew the difference between concern and control. That tone in his voice. That wasn't worry. That was ownership. Eventually, his footsteps faded. I waited another full minute before I peeled back the curtain. No one in the hallway. I slid the deadbolt and checked it twice, then went back to the painting. Dusk Ledger hung under the only good lamp I owned. Halogen bulb, a little buzz if you stood too close. I leaned in. The trees were too precise, too symmetrical, each trunk lined up like columns. It didn't feel painted, it felt drafted, measured, controlled. Hidden between the trunks were tiny colored shapes, burnt orange triangles, faded green chevrons, A couple of deep blue lines that broke pattern just enough to make your brain itch. I knew the style. I'd seen it before. I restore vintage signs for a living. Bowling alleys, drive-ins, old diners that people pay too much to feel nostalgic in. I've seen artists bury messages in lettering curves and neon tubing, usually inside jokes or hidden initials. But this wasn't whimsy. This felt surgical. I flipped the canvas over again. The back had a yellowing sticker that read, Westbridge Gallery, Boston, with a faint stamp date, April 2003. The name Owen Calder was scrawled in ballpoint pen, like a joke someone forgot to finish. I grabbed my laptop and searched. Nothing. No auction listings. No academic mentions. No articles. A couple of dusty student forums where kids argued over whether Calder was real or just a cover used by professors to dodge conflict of interest policies. One guy claimed he saw a Calder piece in a private collection in Connecticut. No picture. No proof. Just another ghost in the machine. At 11:09, Trent texted, "Don't be bitter. I'll slot you where you won't get in the way." I barely glanced at it and flipped the phone face down. At 11:31, Noelle messaged, "Heard about the will. You okay?" She always had good timing. And terrible instincts. Her brother Dax works in Carver Legal. Last time I thought I could trust someone with that last name. It cost me more than I had. I poured a 2-finger bourbon and stared at the painting again. The chevrons started to shift in my head. I'd seen this trick once at a museum gig in Providence. Curator had hidden accession codes in border motifs, used it to track which pieces the board tried to quietly lose. It was called steganography, hiding messages in plain sight. Nothing new, just not the kind of thing you bring up in polite conversation. I pulled out tracing paper and taped it over the canvas, grabbed a soft pencil and started tracing, slow and methodical. Every triangle, every off-center shape. I matched angles, mapped spacing. By the time I was halfway through, a pattern had started to emerge. Not a picture, a rhythm. Like beat markers on a song only one person knew how to play. It wasn't random. I saw odd groupings, 3s, then 5s, then a pair, repeated intervals like they were marching orders. My mind locked in on one chunk that reminded me of an old GPS coordinate format, latitude compressed into geometry, longitudinal breaks disguised as shadows, and overlaid, faint but real, were strings, maybe access keys, maybe placeholders. Whatever they were, they didn't belong in a landscape. I was halfway through sketching another section when my phone buzzed again. It was Inez. 12:07 a.m. Men boxed your mother's study. Said they're inventorying. Be careful, mijo. I froze. The word inventorying had the kind of chill you don't warm up from. I texted her back. Did you let them in? She didn't reply. Then 3 knocks. Same as before. Close. Loud. And Trent's voice muffled through the door. Open up, Reed. We need to talk about the painting. Not a painting. The painting. I backed away from the door, slow, controlled. My eyes locked on the canvas. I should have been mad, furious. But what hit me was fear. Because the last time Trent asked me anything with that voice, I ended up signing away 10% of a design project I built from scratch. Now he was here. At 12:16 a.m., saying, we need to talk. No chance. I turned the lights off and went quiet. Not a sound. No movement. I waited there for what felt like an hour, heart hammering, every nerve lit. Trent didn't knock again. Just stood there for a while. I pictured him in that suit, hair still perfect, maybe smirking at the peephole like he could see through it. Eventually footsteps, then silence. I walked over to the painting again, still lit under the lamp. I stared so hard my eyes burned. One triangle near the top left had a smudge, a smear of gold where none of the others had any. I touched it, just to see. It felt thicker, like an overlay. Inez had said Mom used to stare at it, muttering about numbers. I believed her. I grabbed another sheet of tracing paper and started over. It's not what you think, Trent said through the door, voice tight, less smug than usual, like he was trying on concern but hadn't practiced enough to sell it. I stood dead still, watching him through the peephole like a raccoon cornered in a trash can. Same suit as earlier, tie loosened, hair perfect. "Go home, Trent." "You got everything but a quilt," I said, loud enough to make it stick. He lowered his voice to a low murmur. "I'll wire you $7.4 million tonight if you hand me that canvas." I blinked once, just stood there like a fool, trying to make my brain catch up. Trent wasn't reckless with money, ever. If he was throwing out 7 figures like it was a pizza coupon, the real value would make a hedge fund flinch. I backed away from the door without answering. My lock rattled. He still had the spare key. From when I had pneumonia 3 winters ago and he helped out for a week, mostly by forwarding my calls and using my place like a crash pad while Mom was in surgery. I'd forgotten to change the lock. That mistake hit me in the gut as I sprinted for the painting. I snatched it off the wall, wrapped it in the same towel I'd used earlier, and hustled down the hallway. Behind me, the front door creaked open, and Trent called out like we were 8 again. "Reed, come on, let's just talk." I slammed the bedroom door and shoved a chair under the knob. It didn't feel like enough. Nothing in that moment did. My hands were already moving. I flipped the painting over and ran my thumb along the back edge. There. A thin seam. Clean, too clean. I grabbed a putty knife from my toolbox, slid it along the frame, and pried it up slow. A folded piece of heavy paper slipped free and hit the carpet. Even before I opened it, I knew the handwriting. My mother's cursive. Tight loops. No slouch in the lines. Always steady, even when her hands shook from the meds. "My dear Reed," it began. I dropped to the floor, back against the dresser, knees up, reading fast but breathing slow. She talked about how I always noticed patterns that others missed, how she used to watch me sort puzzle pieces without ever looking at the box. She said Dad and Trent were scared of that. Not jealous. Scared. Because I saw things they'd rather keep buried. The shapes in the painting weren't decoration. They were mapped data, coordinates, passkeys, access strings, and system keys to something she'd hidden for years. Evidence that Carver Dynamics wasn't just built on shady licensing, but outright theft of her work and others. She named projects I recognized: valve controls, telemetry systems, fiber coupling diagrams that I'd seen in trade shows with Trent grinning in front of them like he invented the damn things. "If anyone is reading this with you, they are dangerous," she wrote. "Stop now. Be careful. And go alone." My stomach dropped, and I swallowed hard. I read the rest of the letter with my knuckles against my lips. She gave a full sequence, 2 strings, each tied to something she called primary entry. She included a location too, a property near Phoenicia, New York, deeded under her maiden name, Lydia Ramos. I'd never heard of it. Trent slammed into the door so hard the whole jamb flexed. Paint chipped from the trim. "I'm dialing 911, I yelled through the door. My voice cracked halfway through, but I didn't care. I had the phone in my hand already. He didn't even flinch. "That canvas is company property," he snapped. I heard drawers slamming open. Something metallic hit the floor in the kitchen. I tapped the number and hit send. Told the dispatcher I had a break-in in progress and gave my address. Said the name of the man inside, full and clear. Trent Carver. I knew how this worked. Say it like you're reporting a CEO, not a drunk uncle. It makes people listen faster. The dispatcher stayed on the line. I didn't say anything else, just listened to Trent tearing through my silverware drawer like it might hold a detonator. Then, silence. He left without a word, no threat, no goodbye, and slammed the door like a teenager who didn't get his way. I waited until I heard the elevator ding before I moved. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the phone. I sat right there on the bedroom floor and reread the letter, twice, like it might disappear if I blinked. Then I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Every inch of the canvas, front, back, corners, folds, even the nail heads. I didn't know what I'd need, so I saved it all. Buzz. Inez again. 12:49 a.m. 2 black SUVs at the house. They're shredding boxes. I took what I could, tucked a thumb drive in the planter on your fire escape. Be careful, mijo. I stood and pulled the blinds. Soggy dirt in the planter. I dug through it barehanded, still holding the phone with the other. Found it. Cheap plastic casing, faint red dot pulsing on the side. I closed the window and locked it, then looked at the letter again. Still lying open on the floor. She hadn't left me a painting. She left me a loaded weapon. I didn't sleep a minute. I shoved Mom's letter into a Ziploc bag, packed a duffel with essentials, cash, burner phone, 2 shirts, flashlight, tools, and wrapped the painting in towels like it was bone china. Thumb drive went in my jacket pocket. Then I got in my dented Tacoma and took the back roads out of Nashua like someone had tagged me for a tail. By the time I hit Route 3, the sun was a slit above the trees. I caught the black Tahoe in my side mirror just before the Chelmsford exit. Sleek, matte finish, government clean. It stayed 100 yards back for 40 minutes. Never got close. Never backed off. At a Shell station near Fitchburg, I pulled in fast, bought a Gatorade, walked out the side door, and circled a residential block behind the gas pumps. I parked behind a landscaping truck and waited. The Tahoe rolled by 5 minutes later. Driver stone-faced, no logo, no plates. I let it drift out of sight before cutting west again. I didn't take I-87 like Mom's note suggested. I cut through smaller roads, Boyceville, Willow, Shandaken, until the GPS gave up and the trees got thick enough to swallow the sky. Phoenicia sat like a whisper at the base of the Catskills, and her coordinates pointed to a gravel road 10 miles out that didn't even show on my phone. The place looked like time forgot it. A leaning barn with a caved-in wall, maple sap buckets left to rot on hooks, weeds tall enough to hide a dog. The farmhouse was worse. Paint peeled in sheets, chimney cracked, gutters hanging like pulled teeth. But the barn roof caught my eye. Small solar array, inverter light blinking green. If Dad had known about this property, he'd have dropped a helipad here and named it after himself. I parked under a canopy of overgrowth, scanned the area, then pulled out the painting and laid it flat on the Tacoma's hood. The towel left lint, but I didn't care. The angles in the trees around me, they matched. The canvas wasn't just data, it was a damn map. I walked the perimeter of the barn twice before it clicked. A group of boulders behind the tool shed, same shapes, same spacing as the chevrons in the upper left corner of the painting. Between them, under a blanket of moss and years of leaf rot, I hit metal with my boot. I dropped to my knees, brushed it clean. A steel hatch, square, rusted at the hinges but solid. There was a small flap bolted to one side. I pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Underneath, keypad. Old-style metal buttons, faint glow. Looked like it belonged in a bank vault, not a cow field. I pulled out Mom's letter and typed in the first sequence she'd written. 7 digits, no symbols. The pad beeped once. A green light winked. The hatch hissed and lifted up slow, gas-powered arms, pushing it open like a car trunk in cold weather. A narrow stairwell dropped down into the dark. Metal steps. Cold air poured out, sharp enough to bite my skin. I hesitated for half a breath, then climbed down. The hum hit me first. Low, constant, like a fridge running on a bad breaker. The stairwell bent once, then flattened into a small landing. Another keypad waited on the wall beside a thick gray door. No handle, no keyhole, just buttons. Second sequence. I typed it in, thumb hovering over enter. I pressed it. The door clicked, then thunked open with a deep mechanical sound that echoed through the tunnel. It wasn't a bunker, not even close. The place stretched out into a lab the size of a basketball court. Polished floors, soft overhead lights, everything organized in rows, workbenches, stacked bins, a rolling cabinet labeled climate controlled. On the far wall, framed documents ran shoulder to shoulder. Some looked like patent filings, others were blueprints. One said Lydia R. Ramos in bold at the bottom with a date from 1984. I walked like the ground might fall out under me. I didn't touch anything. Not yet. My hands stayed in my pockets. The air was cold, like hospital air. Clean. Over-sanitized. On one rolling rack sat pieces of tech I recognized in baby form. Prototypes, unpainted, unlabeled. One looked like a fluid valve Carver Dynamics had been marketing since 2002. I remembered the press release, Trent's smug face next to it on a poster. The sketches beside it were dated 1995. I dropped the duffel and unwrapped the painting, set it on the floor against a desk, looked around. "Holy hell," I whispered, but there was nobody to hear it. Then I saw it, a security camera, top corner. Blinking red light. Not dusty, not disconnected. Still alive. I didn't move. Just looked straight at it. I couldn't tell if it was recording or streaming. I didn't know if someone had been watching me since the hatch opened. I stepped back into the center of the room, scanned for signs of recent activity. Nothing obvious. No coffee cups, no jackets, no personal crap. But the lab wasn't abandoned. It was preserved. Like someone meant to come back. Impressive, isn't it? The voice came from behind me, smooth and cold like a polished boardroom table. I turned fast, pulse climbing, and saw my father standing in the entryway like a ghost who didn't know he was dead. Gordon Carver, tan coat, pressed slacks, same silver hair, same shark's eyes. I couldn't breathe for a second. We'd buried him 11 months ago. Closed casket. I'd carried that damn thing myself. Trent appeared beside him like it was a stage cue. Hands in his pockets, tie back on, face smug again. Like nothing had happened in Nashua. Like he hadn't broken into my apartment and offered me hush money on a painting he swore was company property. I said the first dumb thing that popped into my mouth. "You were dead." Dad smiled without moving his eyes. "Sometimes you have to exit to clean up a mess. Your mother's passing was regrettable. Mine was strategic. I just stood there, painting at my feet, hands slightly raised like I couldn't decide whether to punch or run." Trent glanced around the lab like it was a storefront. "We couldn't crack her access protocol. Nothing we tried got us past the first level. She locked it with a personal sequence." He looked at me like I was a door. "We needed you to lead us in." It landed. All of it. The will. The painting. The midnight visit. None of it was a snub. It was bait. They knew I wouldn't let go of something that felt off. They knew I'd start tracing. I'd come running like a dog who smelled something buried. They played me. Dad stepped forward, slow, measured. I caught the faint scent of that aftershave he always wore. Cedar and chemical arrogance. "You're going to help us purge this place, Reed," he said, like it was already decided. "Then we're going to forget it ever existed." I backed toward the main console without even looking. My left hand brushed the edge of the workstation. In my head, Mom's voice came through sharp. "If they find you, input BEACON. Then step back." My fingers moved before I thought. I keyed in the third sequence, BEACON-17 spelled out in numbers, and hit enter. The lights overhead shifted amber. Not a flicker. A full, controlled transition. A quiet voice filled the room. "Beacon protocol armed." Full transmission in 90 seconds, Trent's whole posture changed. He moved to the console, eyes scanning the screen. "What did you just do?" Dad didn't raise his voice, but his face curdled like milk left in heat. "What did you do, Reed?" I didn't answer. Trent lunged for the keyboard. I sidestepped and reached under the desk, where I'd spotted a lever earlier, painted red and half covered in dust. I yanked it down hard. The doors slammed shut behind them. The siren started soft and got mean quick, high-pitched, urgent. The monitors along the back wall lit up with a countdown and a rolling list of outbound targets. Regulators, newsrooms, university archives, office of the state attorney general. Trent turned and shouted, "Shut it down! Shut it down now!" Dad didn't move. He was watching me. I stood there, heart thumping, throat dry, adrenaline making everything too sharp. "She never stopped building," I said, eyes locked on his. You built an empire on her work. And others. There's a ledger in every frame. Dad finally moved. Half step forward, chin lifted. He tried the old tone. Think like a carver, Reed. Be strategic. We can fix this. You just gave away leverage we could have controlled. It didn't land. Not this time. This room wasn't theirs. It was hers. Every detail, every file, every schematic. She built this place while they were too busy holding press conferences and cooking fake patents. Trent slammed a fist against the wall, looking for a panel, a breaker, anything. We need to override the system, he barked. Too late, I said. Mom gave me 90 seconds. You've wasted half. Dad reached for the keyboard, then stopped. You don't know what kind of hell you've just triggered. I tilted my head. No, but I know what kind of hell you were trying to bury. The monitor closest to me pinged. Transmission initiated, it said in bold text. I stepped back and folded my arms. My hands were still shaking, but I held them still. You faked your own death, I said, voice low but steady. Then used the will to manipulate me into cracking her system for you. You think the world's gonna let that slide? Dad's voice dropped to a whisper. I protected the company, I snapped. You protected yourself. You used her genius, her name, her damn time, then erased her from it like she was an ink smudge on your resume. The room was drowning in sound now. Alarms, server fans, the mechanical clank of autosafes locking down. Trent kicked a chair and cursed. You're gonna burn everything down because she got sentimental? No, I said, because she was smarter than both of you and you knew it. Dad stepped toward me again. You're not built for this, Reed. You think exposing us makes you some moral hero? The board won't protect you. The public forgets. This will fade. I nodded toward the monitors. Not if I leave receipts. I could see it now. Every document in this lab, every patent logged under Lydia R. Ramos, every design she never got credit for, on its way out to people who could make it stick. The siren stopped. The countdown hit 0. One final alert rolled across the screen. Transmission complete. Beacon protocol archived. Trent sat down hard on a bench like the air left his lungs. Dad didn't move. He just stared at the console like it betrayed him. You really don't get it, I said. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She didn't want your money. She wanted her name back. The room went still, buzzing only with power. Dad looked up at me, something in his face finally cracking. She would have destroyed us all. I shook my head. No, she just made sure you couldn't destroy anyone else. The beacon went off like a flare gun aimed straight at the sky. My phone lit up before the monitors even finished spitting out confirmations. Number after number. Blocked, unknown, restricted. I ignored them all and kept my eyes on the screens. One by one, status reports dropped in like a rain of nails. Upload complete. Archive mirrored. External transfer initiated. Then came the sirens. Low at first. Distant. But getting closer fast. I'd tripped some kind of local alert when I activated the protocol, probably a security measure built into the power grid. Whoever Mom wired this place to, she'd made sure it wouldn't stay secret once it cracked open. Heavy fists pounded the storm hatch. I flinched. A voice followed, shouting, male, authority in the tone. County deputy! Who's inside? Dad and Trent froze. They locked eyes in that silent Carver way I'd seen before. Once when the board caught wind of a leak, and once when I found out our senior designer resigned right before her contract vested. The look wasn't panic. It was calculation. The kind that says, do we run or bury the witness? This time the steel did the answering. Locked. Sealed. I walked to the hatch window, held my ID up to the glass, and shouted through the metal. I'm Reed Carver. I called 911 last night. I'm not resisting. There's evidence inside. The deputy motioned for backup. He didn't argue, just radioed something in and stayed by the hatch, hand on his weapon. Inside, Trent started doing geometry with his eyes, looking at vents, panels, distances. But the angles kept collapsing. There was nowhere to go. When the door finally unsealed, it did so with a hydraulic groan that made every muscle in my neck tighten. 2 deputies came in first, followed by a pair of men in windbreakers, who didn't bother with greetings. "Attorney General's office," one of them said flatly, flipping a badge. "Everybody keep your hands where we can see them." Dad went silent. Completely. The way guilty men do when they know no spin will stick. They split us up outside. Cool air hit my face like a slap. My lungs felt new. They put Trent in a squad car and took Dad to a bench near the barn. I sat on the hood of my truck and told them everything. No drama, no speeches, just the facts, dates, locations, the thumb drive in my jacket pocket, and the letter from Mom still folded in the Ziploc bag. One of the AG guys took it like it was radioactive. By sundown, the news had it all. Helicopters, camera crews, media vans like ticks on a deer carcass. I sat in the motel watching the coverage. First came the headlines: Carver Dynamics linked to stolen designs. Then the one I didn't expect: Gordon Carver alive, detained for questioning. But what got me, what stopped me cold, was the moment the woman anchor said my mother's name. She said it slowly, like she didn't want to mess it up. Lydia Ramos, original inventor behind several key systems. I had to sit down. My legs just gave out. At 2:07 a.m., my phone buzzed again. It was Noelle. "Tell me you're okay." I hovered over the screen, thumb ready to type back. Then I flipped the channel and saw Dax, her brother, Carver's legal golden boy, on a panel, defending the company like it hadn't just been caught with its hand halfway through a century of stolen work. I set the phone face down and left it unanswered. Around breakfast, Inez called. Her voice was calm, but tired. "Your mother has one more envelope," she said. I hid it inside the old sugar canister with the blue stripe. "Come by when it's quiet." I didn't ask why she didn't just text that. I knew. Some things need breath. I checked out of the motel off I-87 and started the drive back north. Somewhere past Albany, the Tahoe showed up again. Just for a minute. Tinted windows, same matte finish. I stayed steady. Then it peeled off when a state cruiser dropped in behind me, like it didn't want the attention. When I got home, the front door was shut, but the lock felt wrong. Inside, my apartment looked like someone had opened every drawer, every cabinet, then closed them just enough to make it look untouched at a glance. The kind of ransack job done by someone trained to make you second-guess your own paranoia. I checked under the sink, behind the couch, even lifted the toilet tank lid. But it was Inez who'd kept it simple. I went to the kitchen, pulled the sugar canister from the top shelf, and popped the lid. There it was, a plain envelope with my name in her handwriting. Inside, a safety deposit key. Small metal tag read, "Sage Bank, Box 1147. There was a note, too, not long, just a few words. Her handwriting was slower this time, uneven. Trust the paper, not the people. I leaned on the counter and let it sink in. Whatever was in that box, she'd set it aside long before any of this blew open. She didn't trust the courts, didn't trust the company, but she trusted the weight of documents. The record, the receipt trail, the stuff you can't rewrite when the camera's shut off. I put the key in my coat pocket and went to the fridge, grabbed the last cold beer I had left, and sat down on the couch that someone else had probably sat on hours before me. I no longer felt like a son, more like an archive tech in the middle of a wildfire. The bank lobby smelled like pine cleaner and new carpet, but the tension hit me harder than the scent. The manager, a man who looked like he wore stress as a tie, led me to a private room after verifying the key twice. He handed me a waiver the size of a phone book and said, "Box 1147, please sign here, here, and here. Initial this." And again here I signed. He handed me the box like it might detonate. It was plain metal, cold to the touch. Inside was history waiting to set fire. Patent assignments, dozens, typed out in clean, unshakable legal format. Licensing drafts with dates that went back to the 90s. 2 unfiled applications still marked confidential, all under the name Lydia Ramos. No mention of Carver Dynamics anywhere. On top was a note in her handwriting, centered and underlined. In case of forced sale, trigger Rider C. I rifled through until I found it. Rider C. Stapled to a licensing agreement from a decade ago. Legalese written sharp and clear. It was a tripwire. An automatic injunction. Temporary at first, but permanent. The second, a regulatory body confirmed the theft. All it needed was an evidence packet and a name on the record. Beacon's confirmations hit that bar. The paper did the rest. I laughed. Right there in the quiet room. Full volume. The manager peeked in, worried I'd lost it. "You good?" he asked. I waved him off. "Yeah, she was just smarter than all of us, that's all." He didn't know what to do with that, so he backed out and closed the door. I kept digging. A yellow legal pad sat under the forms. I flipped it open. Page after page of names. First names, last names, company nicknames. Some I knew. Engineers, designers, coders. People whose work I'd seen passed off at conferences as internal innovation. Most had dollar amounts next to them. I turned to the back. A new title stared back at me in Mom's block print. Paid to stay quiet. Below it, check numbers, dates, amounts. One last column said, regretted. Some had a single check. Others had 4 or 5. But a few names were underlined. I circled one, Annika Verma. She designed a thermal valve in 1998, and we'd rebranded it as Carver IP in 2002. I remembered the exact product launch. I also remembered the dinner where Dad called her technically impressive, but emotionally erratic. I found her number scrawled in the corner of the pad. No label, just digits and a question mark. I called. She picked up on the second ring. "Dr. Verma, this is Reed Carver," I said. "I know what they did to you." Silence. Then a single breath. "Is this real?" she asked, voice shaky. "Or is this another round of legal gymnastics?" "I've got the patents," I said, "in her name. And your name is on the regret list." She started crying. Didn't apologize for it. Didn't try to hide it. "Does this time stick?" "Yes," I told her. "On paper." That night, Inez made me dinner like I hadn't been hunted across state lines for days. We sat at her tiny table, 2 plates between us, and she poured water into chipped glasses like it was wine. A knock came an hour later. I was ready to bolt, but it wasn't a threat. It was an SEC investigator, Evelyn Park. She was younger than I expected, but sharp. No small talk, just business. She slid a folder across the table, tapped it once. "Protective order," she said, "filed and stamped. Your mother assigned you as sole beneficiary on a bundle of patents and related filings. The trust is legitimate. The agency has already acknowledged the Beacon transmission as official evidence." I flipped through the pages, skimming. It felt surreal. My name on a stack of intellectual property worth God knows how much, and Evelyn just sitting there like it was Tuesday. "She weaponized ethics," Evelyn said, almost admiring. "She didn't just expose the theft. She set up a choke point. They can't use a single bolt unless you say yes." I sat back, stunned. "No one can license around it? Not without landing in court or getting blacklisted from every regulatory partner in the country?" she said. "Your mother cut them off at the knees." My phone buzzed again. More missed calls from Noelle. I didn't answer. The next morning, a courier showed up with an envelope from Graves and Temple. Amended corporate bylaws. I'd never seen them before. Inside was a clause that stopped me cold. If controlling intellectual property shifted outside the executive board, a mandatory emergency meeting had to be held within 10 business days. At the bottom, it was signed L.R. Ramos, founding inventor. She hadn't just planned this. She'd timed it to detonate after her death, knowing exactly how slow the board moved when there wasn't a rule forcing them to act. I called Graves. "I'm invoking the emergency clause," I told the senior partner. "Send the notices. I want the meeting on the books for next Thursday, 9:30 a.m. sharp." He tried to stall, said he needed time to verify signatures. Evelyn stepped in. "Let him know what injunction means," I said. She did. The meeting got scheduled before lunch. That night, I sat in front of Dusk Ledger with the bank folder spread open beside me. I stared at the lines, the shapes, the chevrons hiding secrets in plain view. Then I noticed the signature again, Owen Calder, and something snapped into place. Brush IDS. I'd seen them in her old sketchbooks as a kid, tiny identifiers she used to catalog techniques. I flipped through one I'd kept for sentimental reasons. Same brushwork, same technique, same quirks in the layering. The artist wasn't a ghost. He never existed. Owen Calder was my mother. She'd painted the key, hid it in our study, wrapped it in family drama, and called it a legacy. And they never even saw it. I grabbed a sticky note, wrote, "Calder equals Ramos," and slapped it on the corner of the frame. Then I leaned back and let the freight train keep rolling. The boardroom at Carver Dynamics smelled like leather, panic, and old coffee, the kind of place where people used to pretend the walls couldn't hear. I walked in, wearing the only suit I owned, and a pair of scuffed boots with Catskills mud still dried into the treads. No one said a word. The first thing I did was hang Dusk Ledger on the wall, where Dad's portrait used to be. I brought my own hook and told the maintenance guy exactly where to drill. When he stepped back, you could feel the air shift. The room didn't belong to Gordon Carver anymore. Not to Trent. Not to anyone but the one person they'd buried on paper and underestimated in life. The directors kept their eyes on the table, the windows, the ceiling, anywhere but me. I walked to the head of the table, laid out the trust documents, Rider C, and the SEC's stamped letters like a poker hand no one wanted to challenge. "We license on fair terms," I said, "to everyone we wronged, or we freeze the whole Machine A." Silence dropped heavy across the room until one voice piped up. "Dax, Noel's brother, legal counsel, part-time family vulture. The trust's invalid," he said, thumbing through the first few pages. "Your mother couldn't override the executive board's IP rights unilaterally." Evelyn Park cut him off. "The state has your father in custody. A judge already verified the trust and triggered its enforcement protections. That's not opinion. That's court record." Dax looked like he wanted to keep arguing. But when Evelyn pulled out the protective order, he shut up. We voted. 5 abstained, 3 voted no, 2 said yes. Not enough to pass, until I explained what Rider C meant in real terms. The line items they'd be responsible for if we fought this in court, instead of settling: retroactive damages, licensing theft, and patent infringement across 5 countries. By the end of the math, 3 abstentions flipped. The motion carried. I named a caretaker CEO on the spot, a former engineering lead who'd left a year earlier after pushing back on aggressive attribution practices. Priya Shah. When I said her name, her eyes widened from the back row. By the time she made her way to the front, the stunned look had already melted into something sharper. "You sure about this?" she asked under her breath as I handed her the paperwork. "I'm not doing this alone," I said, "and you were the only one who walked away instead of selling out." She nodded once and took her seat. Just like that, we had a new lead. After the meeting, I went to Dad's old office. They hadn't touched a thing. His leather chair, his dry fountain pen on the blotter, the framed degrees. But behind one of those bland corporate landscapes above the fireplace, I found a wall safe. Mom's last sequence from the painting, the only one I hadn't used yet, opened it. Inside was a slim black ledger. The title stamped on the front made my stomach turn: Consolidations. It listed names, payouts, legal threats, and 2 entries under accident investigations that made me sit down hard in the chair he'd always told me not to touch. I scanned each page, heart hammering. Then I packed it up and handed it to the Attorney General's office that same afternoon. No hesitation. I called Dr. Verma back that night, told her what I'd found, offered her a public apology and a licensing deal. Full retroactive credit and terms she set. She didn't cry this time. She asked if we were serious. "Put it in writing," I said. "We'll sign." During a break the next morning, a junior board director slid me a folded note. "Watch your 6. Graves took a retainer from your father after the funeral. That tracked. I fired the law firm that afternoon and moved all our corporate legal work to a different shop out of Philadelphia, one that didn't answer to ghosts. A week later, someone tried to smear me online. Some tech blog ran a piece titled, "Bitter Son Sabotages Legacy." The photo they used wasn't even me. Some other guy named Reed, who was apparently a librarian in Oregon. I skipped the argument. I posted scanned excerpts from the trust, the SEC filings, and one neat little reveal. Owen Calder equals Lydia R. Ramos. That painting went viral faster than I expected. By noon, the same blog ran a correction. By 5 p.m., half the comments were roasting the board. I spent the rest of that week walking every floor. Engineering, production, shipping, even fulfillment. In each department, I said the same thing. If you helped bury credit, fix it. Quietly. Now. If you did the work and got buried, my door's open. Don't wait for permission. Most people just nodded, kept their heads down. Some gave me the side eye, waiting for the punchline. But a few, older engineers, former interns, now full-time staff, they saved that speech. I saw it in their faces. They tucked it away like a lit match. No smiles, no applause. I just kept walking. We launched the Lydia Fund with $28.5 million from Carver Dynamics settlement reserves, restitution and grants for inventors who'd been pushed out, bought off, or ghosted in footnotes. I made the first call myself to Jorge Salazar, a retired machinist from Dayton who built a pump valve in his garage in 2001 that our company swore we'd developed in-house the year after. When I told him who I was, he said, "I'm too old to sue anybody, son." I said, "Good. This isn't a lawsuit. It's a correction." He didn't say anything for a while. Then he asked if he could call his wife into the room before I read off the number on the check. The media tried to wrap it up like a redemption arc. Some lady in a blazer asked if I was seeking closure, like it was a damn spa treatment. I looked dead into the camera and said, "No, we're seeking receipts and writing checks." It didn't go viral, but the message got around. A week later, Noelle texted and asked if we could meet for coffee. I picked a diner downtown that had cameras pointing at every booth and a waitress I knew by name. She showed up looking tired. Not fake tired, real tired. She said she didn't know about Dad's fake death. I believed her, but I told her straight, "I think you didn't know that part. But the rest? You sat too close not to smell the smoke." She didn't argue, just slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed emails, Dax bragging to a buddy about burying the art boy with one painting. Turns out he helped draft the will language. The whole stunt was his idea. Would have worked too if Mom hadn't written her own ending. I gave the folder to Evelyn Park the next day. 48 hours later, Dax resigned to spend more time with family, which apparently meant dodging reporters and refreshing his inbox until a grand jury summons landed like a bomb. Trent wrote me from county. The letter was 2 pages of half threats, half pleas. Said I'd ruined our name. I took a photo of Dusk Ledger hanging where Dad's portrait used to be and mailed it back with no words. He'd understand. The AG's office called to say Dad had clammed up. He was demanding trial. Evelyn just shrugged and said, "That's fine." The paper trail's built like rebar. Juries love paper. Then Priya found something else. A second set of books buried in an old share drive no one had touched in years. They showed Dad and 2 senior directors laundering royalties through a Delaware shell company called Ridgepoint Harvest. It was all there. Fake invoices, rerouted payments, backdated licensing statements. I didn't even bother pretending to be shocked. Subtlety was never a Carver family value. We fired the 2 directors the next day, filed clawbacks, and made the findings public. The stock cratered for 8 days straight, then leveled off when investors realized we weren't bluffing and we weren't hiding. I expected more screaming. Instead, we got silence, and then support. Quiet, but solid. About a month in, Inez brought me a small envelope, final one from Mom. She said it was timed. I opened it alone in the conference room after hours. No instructions, no formulas, just her story, handwritten, 4 pages long, about learning to code in public libraries while men took credit for her notes and offered her collaboration deals that always ended with them on patents and her name in the email chain. She ended it with, "If they ever tell you to wait your turn, Reed, ask them whose clock we're using." I stood there at the window, reading it until the cleaning crew came through. One of the guys saw my face and gave me a nod like he got it. I didn't apologize. That night I walked the shop floor again. One of the techs in assembly, kid with sharp eyes and a busted bootlace, looked up from his station and asked, "Is this going to actually change anything?" I stopped, took a breath. "It already did," I said. "The old man's ledger is in evidence." He nodded once and got back to work. 16 years on, I'm 55 and telling this from a place that doesn't smell like cologne, lies, or corner office bullshit. We rebranded the company 5 years ago, North Star Works. We kept the systems, the tools, the people who mattered, and burned everything that reeked of Carver. That name had rot in it you couldn't sand out, and I wasn't interested in polishing a corpse. The Lydia Fund's still running. 43 payouts so far. The smallest check was $9,300 for a prototype we shelved back in 2004, and quietly used anyway. The biggest was over $6 million, and came with a public apology and a seat on our advisory board. That one made headlines, sure. But the small ones, those are the ones that matter most. Those are the ones where I can look somebody in the eye and say, "We see you." Late, but real. We host a build fair every year now. High school and community college teams. No red carpet, no corporate fluff. Just tools, mentorship, and room to think. Last spring, a kid from Utica rolled in with a pump redesign that beat our spec by 14%. We licensed it that same day and gave him credit in the press release. I asked him where he learned that geometry trick. He said, "From an art class." I laughed so hard I scared the guy. Dusk Ledger still hangs in my office. Same spot. No plaque, no light, just there. Some days I stare at those layered shapes and think about every time someone called me Art Boy, like it was a punchline. Turns out it wasn't a joke. It was a crowbar. Trent got out last month. Deal left him broke and quiet. He texted me. Just one word. Coffee? I let it sit. Some patterns don't need to be redrawn. Dad never made it to sentencing. Stroke, minimum security infirmary. They said he died quiet. I believe that. He stopped writing a few years back. The last thing I got was an empty envelope with no return address. I didn't open it. Just kept it as proof that I didn't need his last word. Noelle remarried. Sent me a short note, apologizing for not asking harder questions back then. I told her I wished her well, and I meant it. Not every mess needs a sequel. A journalist came through last fall, young guy. Said he was writing a piece about corporate redemption arcs. He asked if revenge felt good. I told him, revenge wasn't the point. Then I walked him down to the shop floor and let him talk to the welders, the junior engineers, the contract designers whose names should have been on plaques 20 years ago. Told him to write about them. He did. At night, the building goes quiet. Most of the floors go dark. I stay late more than I should. Sometimes I stand outside the old server room and swear I can hear my mother humming that off-key tune she used to butcher when she cleaned. I know it's just the vents. I'm not crazy, but I still stand there until it fades. She didn't leave me a throne. She left me a choice. And I made it. We took the power they used to humiliate me and handed it to the folks they ignored. We turned a trap painting into a blueprint. And every time a check clears into the hands of someone who thought the door was shut forever, I lean back in my chair, look at Dusk Ledger and say, "That'll do, Mom." What would you have done if you found your family built an empire on stolen work? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story grabbed you, hit like and subscribe.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.